Welcome to Stories for Sleep. If you're looking for peaceful escapes, soothing tales, and the perfect way to unwind after a long day, you're in the right place. Our stories will carry you away to magical lands, where dreams come alive and peace settles in your heart. Let us guide you to a world of tranquility and serenity, where each story is carefully crafted to ease your mind and help you drift into a restful sleep. Whether it's a heartwarming adventure, a calming bedtime tale, or a mystery that will make you feel cozy under the covers, we've got something for everyone. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to join our peaceful journey so you never miss a new bedtime story. Sweet dreams await, and they start right here with us. There was a village far away, surrounded by forests and hills. In the middle of the village stood an ancient willow tree, its long branches hanging low like tangled hair. The villagers often whispered about it. They said the tree was alive, watching everyone who passed by. But no one dared to go near it after sunset, for strange things happened when the moonlight touched its leaves. One evening, a curious young boy named Jack decided to see the tree for himself. He had heard the stories, but he didn't believe them. With his lantern in hand, he walked through the darkening woods, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the quiet night. The closer he got, the colder the air seemed to become. As he reached the tree, he felt a strange shiver run down his spine. Something didn't feel right. Jack stood still, staring at the massive trunk of the willow tree. The branches swayed gently in the wind, but there was no breeze. Suddenly he heard a soft whisper, like someone calling his name. Jack. Jack, the voice was faint, but it seemed to come from the very heart of the tree. Jack's heart raced, but he couldn't move. The whisper was so clear now, like it was right beside him, urging him to step closer. With shaking hands, Jack stepped forward. The ground beneath him felt soft, as if the earth itself was alive. He reached out to touch the bark of the tree, and as his fingers made contact, the whispers grew louder, turning into soft giggles. The tree seemed to pulse with a strange energy. Jack's breath caught in his throat as the shadows around him began to dance and move like living creatures. As the moonlight shone brightly above, Jack felt as though invisible eyes were watching him from every direction. He turned around, but there was no one in sight. The shadows beneath the willow tree stretched long, reaching toward him like fingers. He tried to back away, but his feet felt glued to the ground. The whispers grew louder, now mixed with the sound of soft footsteps behind him. Jack's heart raced faster. Suddenly, the air around him felt thick, almost suffocating. He could no longer see the path back to the village. The shadows seemed to swirl around him, drawing him closer to the tree. Jack looked up, and for a split second, he saw a dark figure in the branches. It was too fast for him to understand, but it was there, watching him with glowing eyes. He could no longer tell where the tree ended and where the shadows began. Jack stumbled backward, his pulse pounding in his ears. The whispers were now almost deafening, and the shadows around him twisted like ghostly shapes. He tried to run, but his body wouldn't obey. His legs felt heavy, like the ground itself was pulling him down. The figure in the tree seemed to move, its shape becoming clearer. It was a dark, twisted form, with long fingers reaching out toward Jack. Suddenly, the voice spoke again, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was clear, deep, and commanding. "You should not have come here, Jack. The willow tree holds secrets that are not meant for your eyes." Jack tried to scream, but no sound came from his mouth. The figure in the tree began to descend slowly, its eyes glowing brighter as it came closer. The shadows began to close in, and Jack realized with horror that he might never escape. Jack could feel the presence of the figure surrounding him, its cold touch creeping over his skin. The shadows were everywhere now, moving like smoke, twisting and changing shape. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a deep, haunting silence. Jack wanted to run, but his body remained frozen, unable to move. The figure, now fully visible, stood before him, its dark eyes locking onto his. "You were warned," the figure said in a low, gravelly voice. "The willow tree takes what it desires. Your curiosity has bound you to it forever with that." The shadows began to pull Jack toward the tree. He struggled, but it was too late. The last thing he saw was the dark figure reaching out to touch his face. As his vision blurred, he realized that the willow tree had claimed him, just as it had claimed others before him. As Jack's vision faded, he felt himself falling deeper into darkness. His body felt heavy, almost weightless, as if he was sinking into the ground. The last thing he remembered was the cold touch of the figure's hand on his face. Then everything went quiet. He could no longer hear the whispers or the rustling of the branches. Slowly, Jack opened his eyes to find himself in a strange place, surrounded by mist and shadows. He wasn't alone. All around him were figures, their faces pale and lifeless, staring at him with hollow eyes. They were trapped, just like him. Jack realized with a chill that these were the forgotten souls, those who had dared to come near the willow tree and never returned. They had been swallowed by the tree's dark power. Jack tried to move, but his feet felt heavy, like they were rooted to the earth. Jack could feel the cold air around him, and the shadows seemed to grow taller, taller than the tallest trees in the forest. The spirits around him remained silent, their eyes full of fear, but they couldn't move either. It was as though the willow tree's curse had frozen them in time. Jack's heart raced as he wondered if he would be like them, trapped forever, lost in the endless night. Just as Jack thought he couldn't bear it any longer, the figure appeared again. It hovered before him, its dark eyes glowing like burning coals. "You should not have entered the tree's domain," it whispered. "Now you are one of us, lost, forgotten, never to be free." Jack felt a wave of panic rise within him. He wasn't ready to be one of these spirits forever. He had to find a way out. As Jack searched for a way to escape, the figure spoke again. "There is a way to break the curse, but it comes with a price." Jack looked up, desperate for any chance to escape this nightmare. "What is the price?" he asked, his voice trembling. The figure smiled darkly, revealing sharp, twisted teeth. "The price is your soul, Jack. Give up your will to the willow tree, and you may leave. Refuse, and you will remain here, with us, forever." Jack's mind raced. He didn't want to give up his soul, but the thought of being trapped in this dark place forever terrified him. He felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. What if there was no other way out? What if this was his only chance? Jack closed his eyes, trying to think clearly. The whispers from the other spirits surrounded him, but he ignored them. The figure in front of him watched silently, waiting for his decision. Jack realized that the only way to truly escape was to destroy the source of the willow tree's power, the heart of the tree itself. With newfound determination, Jack turned and ran toward the tree in the distance. The shadows tried to stop him, wrapping around his legs and pulling him back. But Jack fought through them, his will stronger than the fear gripping him. As he approached the massive willow tree, he saw the hard and eerie, glowing orb hidden deep within the tree's roots. This was the source of its dark magic. Jack reached for the orb, his hands trembling. He knew that touching it would either save him or seal his fate forever. As his fingers brushed against the cold surface of the heart, a surge of energy rushed through him. The tree trembled, and a voice, both familiar and alien, echoed in his mind. "You dare challenge me," it growled. For a moment, Jack hesitated. The whispers in his mind grew louder, telling him to stop. But he couldn't turn back. With all his strength, he grabbed the orb and ripped it from the tree's roots. The moment he did, the entire forest seemed to shudder. The shadows recoiled, and the spirits let out a final, haunting wail as they faded into nothingness. Jack felt the world around him spinning, and then nothing. He opened his eyes to find himself lying on the ground near the willow tree. The night was silent, and the air was warm. The oppressive darkness had lifted. He was free. As he sat up, Jack looked around. The willow tree no longer loomed ominously over him. It was just an ordinary tree now, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. The spirits were gone, and the whispers were no more. Jack had broken the cursed dot, but as he stood up to leave, he felt a strange weight in his chest. Something was missing, as if the tree had taken a part of him with it. Jack knew that no matter how much he tried to forget, the memory of the willow tree would haunt him forever. Years passed, and Jack grew old. He never spoke of the willow tree or the spirits he had encountered. But deep down, he knew that the shadows would always follow him. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, he would feel eyes watching him from the darkness. And every time he walked through the woods, he couldn't help but glance at the ancient willow tree. Though the tree was no longer dark and cursed, Jack knew that something still lingered beneath its roots. The spirits may have been freed, but the tree remained a silent watcher of those who dared to approach its shadow. And as Jack looked back one final time, he wondered if the tree would ever truly let go of its secrets, or if it would forever remain a part of the forest's dark history. Years passed, and Jack grew old. He never spoke of the willow tree or the spirits he had encountered. But deep down, he knew that the shadows would always follow him. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, he would feel eyes watching him from the darkness. And every time he walked through the woods, he couldn't help but glance at the ancient willow tree. Though the tree was no longer dark and cursed, Jack knew that something still lingered beneath its roots. The spirits may have been freed, but the tree remained a silent watcher of those who dared to approach its shadow. And as Jack looked back one final time, he wondered if the tree would ever truly let go of its secrets, or if it would forever remain a part of the forest's dark history. One evening, as Jack walked home from the village, the air grew unnaturally cold. The sky turned dark, and a fog crept along the forest floor, curling around his feet. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He had a feeling that something was wrong, something he couldn't explain. The shadows seemed deeper than usual, as if the night itself had swallowed the light. "Don't run, Jack. You can never escape the shadow," a voice said, cold and menacing. Jack's blood ran cold as the figure from the willow tree appeared before him, its dark eyes glowing once again. "You took the heart, Jack. Now you belong to the tree, whether you wish it or not." The figure reached out with its long, twisted fingers, and Jack felt an invisible force pulling him toward it. The shadows around him thickened, swallowing the moonlight, He tried to scream, but no sound came from his mouth. The figure loomed over him, its face twisted in a cruel grin. Jack knew that no matter how much he tried to forget, the memory of the willow tree would haunt him forever. Years passed, and Jack grew old. He never spoke of the willow tree or the spirits he had encountered. But deep down, he knew that the shadows would always follow him. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, he would feel eyes watching him from the darkness. And every time he walked through the woods, he couldn't help but glance at the ancient willow tree. Though the tree was no longer dark and cursed, Jack knew that something still lingered beneath its roots. "The tree's power never fades," Jack had whispered. "You cannot break its curse." Not now, not ever. With a sudden jerk, the shadows wrapped around Jack's body, binding him. His limbs went numb, and the world around him began to blur. He was being pulled back into the dark place he had escaped from all those years ago, the heart of the willow tree. Jack's vision faded as he felt himself being dragged deeper into the earth. He could no longer see the village, the forest, or even the willow tree. All he could hear was the soft thumping of his own heartbeat, as if he were inside a giant hollow space. He was trapped once more, just like the forgotten souls before him. But this time, the curse was different. The willow tree's heart was no longer the source of its power. It had been replaced by something darker, something more ancient. Jack could feel the presence of a new force, one that was older than the tree itself. It was the source of the shadows, the one who had been waiting for Jack to return. In the darkness, a figure appeared taller and more terrifying than any Jack had seen before. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly fire, and its voice rumbled like thunder. "You have returned to my domain, Jack. The willow tree was but a servant to me. Now you shall be mine." Jack's body trembled as the figure loomed over him. It was the Ancient One, a creature born from the darkness long before the first tree had ever grown. It had watched as the tree took souls, and it had waited for someone brave enough or foolish enough to break the curse. Now it had come to claim Jack's soul as its own. The Ancient One raised its hand, and Jack felt himself being lifted off the ground, his body floating in the air. The shadows wrapped around him like chains, squeezing the life out of him. "You cannot escape," the Ancient One said. "You belong to me now, just as the others before you." With a final scream, Jack felt his soul slip away, lost in the dark abyss. The willow tree's power had been reborn, and the Ancient One had claimed another victim. The whispers in the darkness grew louder, and the shadows began to dance once more, eager to claim the next curious soul that dared to approach the tree. Jack's world had faded into nothingness. Yet deep within the darkness, a strange feeling began to stir inside him. His soul felt tethered to the shadows, but something was different this time. He was not entirely gone, as if a small spark of life still clung to him, refusing to be swallowed completely. In the distance, Jack could hear soft whispers, the voices of those who had been claimed by the willow tree long before him. They spoke in riddles, trying to guide him toward something. The voices were not cruel, but filled with longing, a desire to escape the eternal dark. Jack focused on the whispers, trying to make sense of their message. He realized that even in the depths of this cursed place, there was still a chance for redemption. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, calling Jack's name. "Follow the path," they urged. "It's the only way out." Jack's heart beat faster as the shadows surrounding him began to shift. He felt an unseen force pulling him forward, toward a faint light in the distance. With each step, the darkness seemed to recede, and the whispers became clearer. They spoke of a hidden path, one that could lead Jack back to the living world. But there was a catch to find the path. Jack had to face his greatest fear. The path would only reveal itself to those who were truly ready to confront the darkness within themselves. Jack's mind raced as he tried to understand what the whispers meant. What was his greatest fear? Was it the curse? The spirits? The shadows? Or was it something deeper? Something buried deep inside him that he had never wanted to face? As he walked through the endless night, memories began to surface, memories of his life before the tree, of his choices and regrets. Suddenly, he stopped. The shadows around him began to twist, taking the form of his past mistakes. Faces of people he had wronged appeared before him, their eyes filled with judgment. The weight of his past pressed down on him, and for a moment, Jack wanted to turn away, to run. But he knew this was the only way forward. He had to face his fears head-on. The shadows continued to shift, revealing a large, cracked mirror. Jack's reflection stared back at him, but it wasn't just his face he saw. The mirror showed the pain he had caused, the lives he had affected, and the mistakes that had led him to this cursed place. It was as if the mirror was showing him his true self, every regret, every lost opportunity. For a long moment, Jack stood frozen, unable to look away. He could feel his heart breaking as he saw the consequences of his actions. But deep down, he knew this was part of the process. To escape the darkness, he had to acknowledge the darkness within himself. With a deep breath, Jack stepped forward, touching the mirror's surface. The glass rippled, and the path ahead became clearer. The path through the shadows began to form before Jack's eyes, leading him through a dark forest, where the trees whispered his name. The path was narrow, and the air was thick with an eerie, unnatural chill. But Jack didn't hesitate. He knew this was his only chance to escape. His journey had been long, and he had faced the darkness within himself. Now, he had to face the final test, the ultimate decision. Ahead, he saw the willow tree, its branches swaying in a gentle breeze. But there was no curse, no darkness. It was simply a tree. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had finally made it back to the place where it all began. The tree was still standing, but it was no longer a threat. It was a symbol of his struggle, a reminder of what he had endured. He approached it cautiously, knowing that the final choice was his. As Jack reached the willow tree, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The darkness had lifted, and the whispers had faded away. The tree no longer held the power to curse or claim souls. It was simply a tree, a part of the world he had once known, now free of its dark influence. For the first time in years, Jack felt truly alive. He could hear the sound of birds in the distance, the rustling of leaves in the wind. The world around him had returned to normal, and the shadows had finally been vanquished. Jack knew that he had broken the curse, not just of the willow tree, but of his own past. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, Jack took one last look at the willow. With a deep breath, he turned away, ready to face the world once more. The curse was gone. The shadows had been banished. And Jack had found his way back to the light, free at last. The light of dawn bathed the forest in warmth, and for the first time in many years, Jack felt the sun's rays on his skin. The dark forces that had once held him captive seemed to dissipate with every step he took away from the willow tree. The whispers were now silent, replaced by the peaceful hum of nature surrounding him. Jack knew his journey was far from over. Though the curse had been lifted, the memories of the darkness still haunted him. Yet, as he walked toward the village, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced his past, confronted his fears, and emerged stronger. And now, he would live with a heart free from the shadows that had once defined him. As Jack entered the village, he was greeted with curious stares. The villagers had heard rumors about his disappearance and the strange events surrounding the willow tree. Some believed the curse had claimed him, others thought he was lost to the forest forever. But when Jack arrived, he was different. He walked with a newfound confidence, no longer burdened by the weight of fear and regret. The villagers noticed the change and whispered among themselves. Jack didn't mind. He had finally found peace, and that was all that mattered. Jack returned to his small cottage on the edge of the village. The memories of his life before the willow tree were hazy, but one thing was clear: he had a second chance. He knew it wouldn't be easy to rebuild the life he had lost, but he was determined to try. As the days passed, Jack found solace in the simple things: the warmth of his hearth, the sounds of the village, and the joy of working with his hands. He rebuilt his garden, planted new crops, and spent evenings by the fire, reflecting on the lessons he had learned from his time in the shadows. The years went by, and Jack's life slowly returned to a quiet normalcy. He became known as a wise man in the village, a person who had seen the darkness and emerged with a deeper understanding of life. People would often come to him for advice, seeking his counsel on matters both small and large. Jack found joy in helping others, offering them the guidance he had learned during his own trials. He never spoke of the willow tree or the shadowy spirits, but those who knew him could sense that there was something about him, something profound, that made him different from the others. One evening, as Jack sat outside his cottage, the sky painted with the soft colors of twilight, he looked toward the forest. The willow tree was no longer a place of darkness, but a part of the natural world, standing tall among the other trees. It no longer held the power to curse or haunt anyone. In that moment, Jack felt at peace. The long journey of fear, regret, and darkness had come to an end. He had learned to forgive himself and had made amends with the past. The shadows that once clung to him had been banished, and the light of the present filled his heart. As the years passed, Jack grew older. He never forgot the lessons he had learned during his time in the shadow of the willow tree. His life became a testament to the power of redemption, courage, and self-reflection. The village grew, and the stories of the cursed tree faded into legend. But Jack's story lived on. One day, as Jack sat beneath a new tree, a sapling he had planted himself, he felt a sense of fulfillment. The world had changed, and so had he. The shadows that once haunted him were now only distant memories, and the willow tree had become a symbol of the strength it took to overcome darkness. Jack had found peace, and in doing so, had left behind a legacy of hope and resilience. As the wind rustled through the leaves of the new tree, Jack smiled, knowing that the shadows had been defeated, and that the light would always find its way through. The years passed, and the village had changed. New faces arrived, bringing with them fresh stories and lives. But Jack, now older and wiser, had become a pillar in the village, a symbol of what could be achieved with strength and perseverance. His days were peaceful, filled with work, reflection, and helping others who sought guidance. Yet, as peaceful as life had become, there were moments when Jack felt a lingering unease. The willow tree, though now just a part of the forest, still cast a shadow in his mind. He wondered, despite everything, if the dark forces he had escaped from might one day return to the world he had rebuilt. One evening, while Jack sat beneath the new tree in his garden, a strange chill swept through the air. The wind rustled the leaves, and in the distance, Jack heard a whisper, a soft, familiar sound that made his heart race. The whisper seemed to echo from the forest, not from the spirits he had once known, but from something darker. Jack's blood ran cold. It was the same whisper he had heard during his darkest days, the same call that had once lured him toward the willow tree. He stood up quickly, his body tense, but the whispering faded as quickly as it had come. He glanced toward the forest, but everything seemed still. Days passed, and the unsettling feeling that something was wrong grew stronger. The village was quiet, but Jack noticed changes. The weather was colder than usual, and the once vibrant forest seemed to lose its color. The whispers that had haunted him before began to grow louder at night, keeping him awake with their chilling tones. Jack knew that something was stirring something from his past. The peace he had worked so hard to build now felt fragile. The shadows were returning, and Jack had a feeling they would not be content to stay hidden for long. He had faced them before, but he was unsure if he was ready to confront them again. One afternoon, an old woman came to Jack's door. She was a traveler, with eyes that seemed to have seen more than most. She spoke in a low, serious voice, warning Jack of a growing darkness in the forest. "The willow tree is not the only one," she said. "There are ancient forces older than the tree itself, waiting to be unleashed." Jack listened intently, realizing that the whispering had been a warning. The ancient darkness was stirring once more, and the willow tree had only been the beginning. The old woman spoke of a hidden power deep within the forest, one that could not be tamed or controlled. And it seemed that this power was growing stronger, seeking to break free. With the old woman's words weighing heavily on his mind, Jack ventured deep into the forest the following day. He needed to understand what was happening and how he could stop it. As he walked through the trees, the air grew colder, and the whispers returned louder, more insistent. They were everywhere, swirling around him like a storm. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he made his way toward the heart of the forest, the place where the willow tree had once stood. But as he reached the clearing, he saw that the willow was gone. In its place, a dark, twisted figure had emerged, a being of shadows, far more terrifying than any spirit Jack had encountered before. The curse was reborn, and the forest had become its prison. The shadowy figure turned toward Jack, its form shifting like smoke. It had no face, no clear shape, but its presence was suffocating, like the weight of the entire world pressing down on him. Jack stood frozen, but the figure spoke in a voice that sounded like the very essence of darkness. "You should not have come here," it said, its voice a haunting whisper. "The shadows are eternal, and they will consume all." Jack took a deep breath, his heart racing. He knew that this was the moment he had been dreading, the moment when he would have to face the true darkness once more. But he wasn't the same man he had been when he first encountered the willow tree. He had learned to confront his fears, to fight the shadows within himself. With a deep, steadying breath, Jack stepped forward, determined not to let the darkness consume him again. The forest seemed to hold its breath as he approached the shadowy figure, ready to face whatever awaited him. Jack stood face to face with the shadowy figure, feeling the weight of its dark presence pressing in on him. The air around them seemed thick with an unnatural cold, and the ground beneath Jack's feet trembled slightly, as if the very earth itself feared the creature before him. The whispers from the forest grew louder, swirling around him like a chaotic storm. But Jack didn't flinch. He had faced darkness before, and he would not be controlled by fear this time. The figure's hollow voice echoed through the forest. "You cannot stop me, mortal. I am the embodiment of the shadows, the curse that has lived for centuries." Jack raised his head, his heart steady. "Maybe, but I've learned that no shadow is too dark to fade away. I've faced worse than you. I won't let you take this world." The figure surged forward, tendrils of darkness stretching out toward Jack. With a swift movement, Jack dodged to the side, his eyes never leaving the creature. He could feel the heat of its presence, but he remained calm, focused. The shadows lashed out again, but Jack was quicker. He had no weapon, only the strength of his will and the knowledge he had gained during his long journey. The first strike missed. Jack's heart raced, and his mind sharpened. He knew this was no ordinary battle. This was a fight for everything he had worked to rebuild. The figure's laughter echoed through the air, a cruel sound that seemed to shake the trees. Jack stood tall. "This ends now," he muttered. As the dark figure attacked again, Jack felt a strange warmth within him. It was the same feeling he had when he first found peace, the light of hope that had never truly left him. For the first time, he realized that the shadows were not invincible. He had faced them, not just in the forest, but within himself. And he had learned to overcome them. With renewed strength, Jack pushed forward. The air around him seemed to shift, growing lighter, warmer. The figure hesitated, sensing the change. Jack's eyes glowed with a determined fire. "You can't control me anymore. The light will always find its way through." The battle raged on, but Jack's resolve grew stronger with every passing moment. As the shadowy figure attacked, Jack's heart began to beat in a steady rhythm, each beat echoing with the power of his resolve. He realized that the true strength lay not in fighting the darkness with force, but in embracing the light inside him, the strength of his heart. The shadows tried to overwhelm him, but Jack remained steadfast, his every step bringing him closer to victory. The whispers began to fade, replaced by a sense of clarity. Jack knew that he was not fighting alone. He was fighting for everything he had ever loved: the village, the peace, and his own freedom. With a final, powerful strike, Jack reached deep within himself and unleashed the strength of his heart. The shadows recoiled, their form unraveling in the light of his determination. The figure screamed, a sound filled with rage and fear, but it could no longer hold its shape. The darkness began to dissolve like smoke in the wind. As the shadow faded into nothingness, the forest around Jack grew still. The air cleared, and the sun pierced through the canopy of trees, bathing the forest in golden light. Jack stood, breathing heavily but victorious. The curse had been broken for good. The forest was silent now, the whispers gone, the shadows dissolved. Jack stood in the clearing, surrounded by the calm of nature. The battle had been long and hard, but he had won. He had faced the darkness within and without, and now he was free. The village would never know the true extent of the battle that had taken place in the heart of the forest. But Jack would carry the lessons with him, always. Darkness may rise, but it would never last. There was always light, always hope, and it would always find its way through. As Jack walked back toward the village, the air warm and peaceful, He felt the weight lift from his shoulders. The shadows had been defeated, and the world would continue to turn in the light. As Jack returned to the village, a sense of peace filled his heart. The shadows that had plagued the forest and his mind were gone, replaced by the soft sounds of birdsong and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The people of the village were unaware of the battle that had taken place, but they could feel the change. The air was lighter, the earth seemed to breathe easier. Jack knew that his work was far from over. The forest, once again, was a place of beauty, but he couldn't forget the darkness that had once lingered there. He had learned that peace was never permanent, that shadows would always return in one form or another. But with every victory, the darkness grew weaker. The balance had shifted, and it was up to him to keep it that way. Days turned into weeks, and Jack continued his life in the village. The whispers that had once filled the air had vanished, and the once barren forest began to flourish once more. Flowers bloomed, animals returned to the woods, and the village once again became a place of warmth and safety. But Jack never let his guard down. He often found himself walking through the woods, watching over the land he had saved. Though the darkness was gone, the memory of it lingered in the back of his mind. It was a reminder that evil never truly vanishes, but only waits for the right moment to return. And when it did, Jack would be ready. Over time, Jack became known as the guardian of the forest. The villagers trusted him, not only because of the battle he had fought, but because of the calm wisdom he carried within him. They came to him with their troubles, seeking advice and solace. And Jack, ever patient and kind, gave them what they needed. But there were those who feared Jack's connection to the forest. They whispered that he had become part of the darkness he had once fought. Jack heard their words, but he understood them. People fear what they do not understand, and the forest, with all its mysteries and shadows, was a part of him now. One evening, as Jack sat by the hearth, he felt a chill creeping into the air, a sensation he had hoped to never feel again. The shadows were returning. They had not vanished completely. They had merely been biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike once more. Jack stood up quickly, his heart pounding. He couldn't afford to wait this time. The darkness that had once taken form in the willow tree had been a mere fragment of something larger, something older. He had defeated one part of it, but the true darkness was still out there, and it was gathering strength. Determined to stop the darkness for good, Jack began searching for answers. He traveled to the old ruins at the edge of the village, where ancient texts and forgotten lore lay hidden. He studied the old maps, read the faded scrolls, and spoke to the elders who still remembered the old tales. What he discovered was more terrifying than he had imagined. The shadows were not a curse of the forest alone, they were a part of the earth itself. A force of nature that had existed since time immemorial, feeding on fear and darkness. Jack realized that if he wanted to defeat them once and for all, he would need to understand their true origins and how they could be destroyed. One day, while searching through the old texts, Jack stumbled upon a prophecy. It spoke of a guardian, a chosen one who would rise to face the shadows and bind them forever. The prophecy was vague, but it hinted at a powerful artifact hidden deep within the forest, one that could seal the shadows away for eternity. Jack's heart raced as he read the words. The artifact had been lost to time, hidden away to protect the world from the darkness. He knew that he had to find it, and quickly before the shadows grew too powerful. The search for the artifact led Jack deep into the forest. into places he had never ventured before. The further he went, the more the air seemed to thicken, the more the shadows seemed to watch him. The forest had changed since the battle. There were places now where the light barely reached, where the trees seemed to whisper of things long forgotten. With each step, Jack's resolve hardened. He could feel the weight of the prophecy upon him, the weight of the future of the world resting on his shoulders. The deeper he went, the more the whispers returned, and Jack could feel the eyes of the shadows upon him. At last, Jack reached the heart of the forest, where the trees grew so close together that they formed an impenetrable wall of bark and leaves. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath his feet was soft and treacherous. He had arrived at the entrance to a cave, one that the ancient texts had described as the resting place of the artifact. As Jack stepped into the cave, the darkness seemed to swallow him whole. The air inside was damp, and the walls seemed to close in on him. But Jack moved forward, his heart steady. He knew that this was where the final battle would take place. As Jack ventured deeper into the cave, the walls narrowed, and the darkness grew thicker. His footsteps echoed off the stone, but the silence that followed felt heavy, almost suffocating. The deeper he went, the more the air seemed to pulse with ancient energy, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Jack's senses were alert, every nerve tingling with the weight of the unknown. Finally, he reached a chamber, its entrance hidden behind a veil of moss and vines. As he pushed through, he discovered a large stone altar at the center, covered in ancient runes. The faint glow of the runes cast an eerie light over the room. Jack approached carefully, feeling the air hum with power. He knew this was where the artifact lay hidden, but the question was, what price would he have to pay to retrieve it? The runes on the altar seemed to shimmer as Jack stepped closer. He could feel the presence of something ancient, powerful, and perhaps dangerous. He placed his hand on the stone, and immediately the air grew colder. The whispers of the shadows filled his mind again, louder now, as if trying to warn him. As Jack pushed forward, a brilliant light erupted from the center of the altar. The shadows recoiled, as if afraid of the light. At the heart of the glow lay a small, delicate crystal, a gem that seemed to pulse with energy, as if alive. Jack reached out and carefully took the artifact into his hands. The moment he did, a violent gust of wind howled through the chamber, and the cave seemed to tremble beneath him. The moment Jack held the artifact, he felt a surge of power coursing through his veins. The shadows outside the chamber began to stir, their whispers growing louder. The ground beneath him began to shake, and the air became thick with the scent of decay. Jack knew that the shadows had sensed the artifact and would stop at nothing to reclaim it. Suddenly, the shadows surged forward, their tendrils reaching out to consume everything in their path. Jack's heart raced as he stood at the center of the chamber, the artifact glowing brightly in his hands. The shadows writhed and twisted, but Jack stood firm, focusing on the power within him and the artifact he held. The shadows surrounded Jack, their dark forms taking shape once more. The figure of the shadowy being, the one he had faced before, reappeared before him, its form towering over him. Its eyes, hollow and empty, glowed with an unnatural light. "You cannot defeat me," it hissed. "I am the darkness that never fades. I will claim this world, and you will never stop me." Jack tightened his grip on the artifact, feeling its power surge through him. "I faced you before," Jack said, his voice steady. "And I won't back down now. I'll stop you." this time forever with a shout. Jack raised the artifact high above his head. The crystal's glow intensified, filling the entire cave with blinding light. The shadows recoiled, their forms twisting in pain. The figure of the shadowy being shrieked, its form flickering as if the light was too much for it to bear. Jack knew that this was the moment. The artifact was the key to sealing the shadows away forever. With all his might, Jack hurled the artifact toward the shadowy figure. The light from the crystal exploded in a burst of radiant energy, engulfing the creature in a brilliant flash. The darkness screamed one last time before it was consumed by the light, vanishing into nothingness. The cave was silent once more, the shadows completely gone. Jack stood, panting heavily, the artifact now dim and lifeless in his hand. The air was thick with a strange stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Jack slowly lowered the artifact, his heart still racing from the intensity of the battle. The shadows had been defeated, but Jack knew the cost had been great. He could feel the weight of the power he had just wielded, the responsibility of it. The forest, once again, was peaceful, but Jack was forever changed. The battle had not just been a fight against the darkness outside, but against the darkness within him. And now he felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that he had done what was necessary. Jack made his way back to the village, the artifact now safely secured. The journey had been long, and the battle had been fierce. But as he walked, he felt the warmth of the sun on his face and the gentle breeze rustling through the trees. The forest was alive again, no longer choked by the darkness. The villagers greeted him as he returned, their faces filled with curiosity. Jack said nothing about the battle he had fought, only that the forest was safe once more. He didn't need to explain. The peace was all that mattered now. He had done his part to protect the world he loved. As the days passed, Jack returned to his life in the village. The shadows were gone, but the lessons he had learned remained with him. He knew that peace was fragile, and that darkness would always try to return. But he also knew that he was stronger now, stronger than he had ever been before. He had faced the shadows, not just in the world around him, but in himself, and he had emerged victorious. The sun rose each morning, casting light over the village and the forest, a reminder that no darkness could ever last forever. Jack, the guardian of the forest, had restored balance, and he knew that as long as he stood guard, the world would remain safe. And so, Jack's journey continued not as a warrior, but as a protector of the light, knowing that even in the deepest darkness, there would always be a new dawn. As Jack stood on the edge of the forest, the calm after the storm was almost surreal. The forest that had once been a place of fear and mystery now felt peaceful, as if the trees themselves were breathing a sigh of relief. The birds returned, their songs filling the air once more, and the rustling of leaves seemed to whisper a message of hope. Jack looked out over the land he had protected, his heart filled with gratitude. He had faced the shadows, conquered them, and now he could finally rest. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that this peace was only temporary, that something else might be waiting in the wings. The world was full of mysteries, and Jack knew better than anyone that they were never fully solved. That night, as Jack sat by the fire, he felt an unusual stillness in the air. The wind had stopped, and even the sounds of the forest seemed to have gone quiet. Jack's instincts told him that something was off, that the calm wasn't as peaceful as it appeared. He stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for the small dagger at his side. A faint whisper reached his ears, not from the forest, but but from deep within his mind. "It's not over," the voice seemed to say. "The shadows will return." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had thought the shadows were gone for good, but now the haunting feeling of their presence lingered like a dark cloud on the horizon. Unable to shake the feeling of dread, Jack decided to venture back into the forest. The path he took this time was unfamiliar, a narrow trail that wound deeper into the trees. The air grew thicker with every step, and the further he went, the more the light seemed to fade. It felt as though the forest itself was pushing him away, warning him not to go further. But Jack pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the strange feeling that had overtaken him. He reached an old, forgotten clearing that he had never seen before. In the center stood a massive stone structure, half covered in vines. It looked ancient, almost otherworldly. As he approached, he felt a chill run down his spine, the same feeling he had experienced when he first discovered the shadows. As Jack stepped closer to the stone structure, he noticed symbols carved into the surface symbols that resembled the runes he had seen in the cave. But these were different, more twisted, as if they were warning him to turn back. His eyes scanned the area, and in the distance he saw something moving in the shadows. It was faint at first, but then it became clearer. A figure, cloaked in darkness, standing at the edge of the clearing. Jack's heart raced as he realized that this was no ordinary figure. It was one of the shadow beings, or something far worse. It seemed to beckon him forward, as if inviting him to step closer to the dark portal it guarded. Jack knew this was no place for him to be, but the pull of the darkness was almost irresistible. He took a step forward, his instincts screaming at him to stop. The figure in the distance began to take shape, revealing itself as the Shadow King, the ruler of the Dark Realm. He was taller than any man, his body made of swirling black smoke and shadows. His eyes burned with an unnatural fire, and his presence seemed to drain the light from the very air around him. "You thought you could defeat me," the Shadow King's voice echoed through the clearing, low and menacing. "You were a fool to believe that the darkness could ever be vanquished. It has always been, and it will always return." Jack stood his ground, clutching the artifact tightly in his hand. "I won't let you destroy this world," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I've defeated you once, and I'll do it again." The Shadow King raised his hands, and the ground beneath Jack's feet cracked open, releasing waves of dark energy. Shadows erupted from the cracks, swirling around him, trying to pull him into the darkness. Jack fought to keep his footing, the power of the artifact surging within him. He had to stop this, once and for all. With a fierce cry, Jack raised the artifact high above his head, its light shining brighter than ever before. The shadows recoiled in fear, but the Shadow King only laughed, his voice full of malice. "The light cannot defeat me," he snarled. "I am the eternal darkness." But Jack's resolve was unwavering. With a surge of power, he thrust the artifact into the ground, and the entire clearing erupted in light. The Shadow King let out a scream as the light consumed him, his dark form disintegrating into nothingness. The shadows, too, were vanquished, their hold on the land finally broken. The forest, once again, was bathed in the light of day. With the final battle won, Jack stood in the center of the clearing, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. The light from the artifact slowly dimmed, returning to its soft glow. The once oppressive darkness had completely faded, leaving behind a sense of peace. The forest, which had been a battleground for so long, now seemed to breathe freely again, its energy vibrant and alive. Jack slowly turned, his gaze sweeping over the land. The journey had been long, and the battles had been fierce, but in the end, the shadows had been defeated. And for the first time, Jack allowed himself to feel hope. He had secured peace, not just for the forest, but for himself as well. There was still much to learn, but he was no longer the same person who had first walked into these woods. As Jack made his way back to the village, he noticed how the landscape had changed. The trees were greener, the flowers more vibrant, and the air itself felt fresher. The forest was healing, and so was he. It wasn't just the darkness that needed to be cleansed, it was the pain inside him that had been lingering for so long. In the quiet of the night, Jack sat by the fire and thought about everything he had experienced. The battles, the loss, the fear, it had all shaped him. But now, with the shadows gone and the forest at peace, he could begin to heal. It wouldn't happen overnight, but he knew that, just like the forest, he too would find his way back to the light. The village people had heard the stories of Jack's courage and strength, though they did not know the full extent of what he had endured. They spoke in hushed tones of the mysterious guardian who had saved them from the darkness, calling him a hero. Jack didn't seek their praise, but he couldn't deny the warmth in his heart when they smiled at him and thanked him for his bravery. In time, Jack became a legend, a protector not only of the forest but also of the village. He became known as the Guardian, a title that honored his sacrifice and his duty. But Jack knew that he had not done it alone. The forest had guided him, and the light had given him the strength to fight. It was a reminder that no one was truly alone in their battles, as long as they had something worth fighting for. One evening, as Jack walked along the edge of the forest, he felt something stir in the air. A strange shiver ran down his spine, and he heard the faintest whisper in the wind. "It's not over," the voice seemed to say. Jack froze, his heart racing. Had the shadows truly been vanquished? Or was this just another warning? He shook his head, dismissing the thought. The shadows had been defeated, and he had done what needed to be done. He was not afraid anymore. But the voice lingered in his mind, a reminder that darkness was never truly gone, it only waited for the right moment to return. Months passed, and the village grew, thriving in the peace that Jack had helped create. Life returned to normal, and Jack resumed his role as protector, always vigilant, always watching. But one night, as he sat by the fire, he felt an inexplicable pull, as if something beyond the village was calling him. He stood and walked toward the forest, following the sensation that tugged at his heart. The trees whispered as he passed, but this time their message was different. It was a call, distant and mysterious. It felt like a new adventure was waiting for him, one that would take him beyond the borders of the forest, into the unknown. Jack stood at the edge of the forest, looking out toward the distant hills. The stars above sparkled brightly, and the night seemed to hum with a new kind of energy. He didn't know where this call was leading him, but he felt a deep sense of purpose. The shadows had been defeated, but new challenges lay ahead, challenges that would test him in ways he had never imagined. With a deep breath, Jack stepped forward, ready to embrace whatever lay beyond. The journey had only just begun, and he knew that, no matter where it led, he would be ready. The Guardian of the Forest was not just a title, it was a life he had chosen, a life of protection, adventure, and endless possibilities. As Jack journeyed farther from the village, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The call from the forest had been strong, but now, as he ventured deeper into uncharted lands, he couldn't help but wonder what he was truly seeking. The path ahead was unclear, the future uncertain, yet Jack's heart was filled with a quiet determination. The forest faded behind him, replaced by rolling hills and fields that stretched endlessly in every direction. Jack's footsteps echoed in the silence, a reminder that he was alone in this new world. But he wasn't afraid. The shadows might have been defeated, but Jack knew that challenges would always find him, because the real battle was never against the darkness outside, but the darkness within. As Jack traveled, the winds began to change. They no longer whispered the words of the forest, but carried with them strange messages, as though the earth itself was trying to communicate. Jack's ears perked up, catching fleeting phrases. Beware the deep, the past is never truly gone, and only the brave can survive. His curiosity grew, but so did his sense of unease. These messages were not from the forest he had known. They were from somewhere darker, more ancient. The winds seemed to guide him, but also warn him. Jack knew that his journey was no longer just a simple quest. It was leading him towards something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. After several days of walking, Jack arrived at a hidden valley, tucked away between two steep mountains. It was a beautiful place, with crystal clear waters flowing through vibrant meadows, but there was a palpable sense of foreboding in the air. The valley was quiet, too quiet. No birds sang, no animals moved. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. Jack could feel the weight of something ancient in the air, something that had been waiting for him. The wind shifted again, bringing with it a faint, eerie melody. It was coming from deeper within the valley, and without thinking, Jack began to follow the sound. It was a haunting lullaby, a tune that tugged at his soul, drawing him closer to the source. As Jack ventured further into the valley, the song grew louder. It was coming from a massive old tree at the far end of the meadow, a willow tree, unlike any he had seen before. Its branches reached high into the sky, twisting and curling like arms that beckoned him. Beneath the tree, a strange figure stood, cloaked in shadow. The figure was humming the same lullaby, its voice low and melodic. Jack felt an overwhelming sense of recognition, as though he had heard this song before. But where? The figure turned to face him, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. It was a woman, but her face was hidden beneath a veil of darkness. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her voice, when she spoke, sent shivers down his spine. "You've come far, guardian," she said. "But the shadows you fought are not the only darkness that exists. You are only one part of a much larger story." The woman stepped forward, her presence almost ethereal. "I am the keeper of secrets," she said, her voice both soothing and haunting. "I have been waiting for you, Jack. The shadows you defeated were just one manifestation of the darkness. But there is a greater evil, one that even the light cannot banish." Jack's mind raced. He had thought the fight was over, that peace had been restored. But now, in this hidden valley, the truth began to sink in. The shadows were just the beginning. There was something far more powerful waiting in the depths of the world, something that had been lying in wait for centuries. "The world is built on a delicate balance," the keeper continued. "For every light, there is darkness. For every peace, there is chaos. You have fought well, but the true test is yet to come. The darkness you face is ancient, and it will take all of your strength to stop it." The keeper led Jack to a hidden cave at the base of the willow tree, where ancient markings covered the walls. These runes were older than anything Jack had seen before, and they seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. She explained that this was the source of the darkness that had plagued the land for centuries. "This cave is the birthplace of the Shadow King," the keeper whispered. "But it is also the prison of something far worse, an entity so powerful that even the Shadow King could not control it. This entity is the true evil, and its time to rise is approaching." Jack felt a cold shiver run through him as the keeper revealed the true nature of his quest. He was not just a guardian of the forest anymore, he was now the only one who could stop an ancient evil from awakening and consuming everything he had fought to protect. As Jack stood in the cave, the weight of his destiny felt heavier than ever before. He had thought his journey was about protecting the forest, but it was much larger than that. The entire world was at stake. He knew now that he could not walk this path alone. The keeper placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch both reassuring and somber. "You will need allies, Jack. You cannot defeat this darkness by yourself. Seek those who can help, those who understand the ancient magic of the world. Only together can you hope to stand against the coming storm." Jack nodded, his resolve hardening. The journey had led him here, to this moment. He wasn't afraid of the unknown anymore. He had faced the shadows, and now he would face the true darkness, whatever it took. He would protect the world. As Jack left the cave, the wind howled around him, carrying with it the same eerie melody he had heard before. It was no longer a lullaby, it was a warning. The storm was gathering, and with it, the shadows of the past were beginning to stir. Jack knew his path was far from over. The keeper's words echoed in his mind as he made his way out of the valley. Allies. Magic. The coming storm. He couldn't do this alone. And as he walked, he realized that the world was much bigger than he had ever imagined. The darkness was not just in the forest, it was everywhere, waiting for the right moment to strike. But Jack was ready. And with each step, he grew stronger, knowing that he was the world's last hope against the coming darkness. Jack's heart raced as he left the valley, the winds now carrying whispers of a coming war. He could feel the darkness moving, shifting, stretching its claws into the world once more. The keeper's words rang in his mind, but they did little to soothe his growing anxiety. He needed to find those who could help him, and quickly. The journey ahead was unclear, but Jack knew where he had to start. There were stories, old legends of powerful beings who had once fought the darkness long ago. If they still lived, they would be his allies. He had to seek them out, no matter the cost. The time for waiting was over. The storm was coming, and Jack was determined to face it head-on. After days of traveling through dense forests and crossing treacherous rivers, Jack reached the first place he had heard of, the ancient ruins of a once great city. It was said to be home to the first of the magical beings, the protectors who had once sealed away the great darkness. The ruins were silent, their crumbling stones covered in ivy. But as Jack stepped forward, a figure appeared before him, tall, cloaked, with eyes that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. "You seek help," Guardian, the figure said in a voice that seemed to echo from the very air around him. Jack nodded, his resolve unwavering. "I need allies to stop the coming storm. Will you help me?" The figure studied him for a moment before speaking again. "The storm you speak of is a storm of old. We knew it would return. But help comes at a price, young Guardian." The figure revealed his name as Aelor, a mage who had once served as a guardian of the balance between light and darkness. He explained that the price for his aid was not a simple one. Jack would need to learn ancient magic, the kind that required not just strength but wisdom, and the willingness to sacrifice part of himself. If you are to wield the power to stop the darkness, you must first understand it, Alor said. You will face trials, and you may not emerge the same person. But if you wish to survive the coming storm, you must be willing to pay the price. Jack hesitated, but deep inside he knew there was no choice. He had to accept the price if he was to have any hope of saving the world. Alor led Jack to an ancient temple hidden deep within the ruins. The temple was dark, its stone walls lined with glowing runes. The air inside was thick with the weight of centuries of magic. Your first trial is one of the mind, Alor explained. You must face your deepest fear. As Jack stepped into the heart of the temple, the world around him shifted. The walls seemed to close in, and he was no longer standing in the temple but in a dark forest, the trees twisted and gnarled, shadows moving between them. Suddenly he saw her, his sister, Lily. She was standing alone, calling his name, her voice echoing in the night. But Jack knew something was wrong. She had died years ago. This was a trick of the darkness. The vision of Lily beckoned Jack closer, her figure growing more distorted with every step he took. The shadows around her whispered his name, urging him to follow. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, his breath quickening. The darkness was trying to pull him back into his past, into his most painful memory. Lily, no, Jack shouted, stepping back. You're not real, but the shadows pressed in, swirling around him. Face your fear, they whispered. Face what you've lost. Jack fought against the pull of the shadows, forcing his mind to stay focused. He refused to be dragged back into the grief of his past. With all his strength, he reached out and broke the illusion. The vision of Lily vanished, and the darkness receded. Breathing heavily, Jack returned to the temple. Alor stood silently, watching him. You have passed the first trial, the mage said, his tone solemn. But there are others. The second trial is one of strength. You must face the darkness itself. Without another word, Alor raised his hand, and the ground beneath them trembled. A swirl of dark energy formed in the center of the temple, growing larger and more menacing with each passing second. Jack braced himself, ready to face whatever this trial would throw at him. The darkness took form, tall, terrifying, and filled with malice. It was the embodiment of every fear, every shadow, every doubt Jack had ever experienced. The battle ahead was not just physical, but a test of his will. The dark entity lunged at Jack, its presence suffocating. The air grew cold, and every movement felt like it was pulling him deeper into the void. Jack fought with all his might, his sword glowing with the magic he had begun to harness. He parried the creature's strikes, but it was relentless, pushing him back with every blow. Jack's mind raced as he searched for an opening. He couldn't win by strength alone. He had to use the magic he had learned, the magic of balance. He focused, calling upon the ancient spells, and with a surge of energy, he struck at the creature's heart. The darkness screamed, but it began to fade, dissipating into the air. As the last remnants of the darkness vanished, Jack stood panting, his body exhausted but his spirit unbroken. He had passed the second trial, but he knew there was still more to face. Alor approached him, nodding in approval. You have proven your strength, Guardian, he said. But the final trial awaits. You will face the true enemy soon. Are you ready? Jack looked out into the distance, where the winds had started to stir again. The storm was coming, and Jack knew that this was just the beginning. The true test would come when the darkness finally revealed itself. Jack stood at the edge of the ancient temple, his eyes focused on the horizon. The storm was closer now, the winds howling, and the skies darkened with the coming shadow. Aelor stood beside him, his expression grim. "The final trial will test everything you have learned," he warned. "Your heart, your mind, your very soul will be pushed to their limits." Jack nodded. He was ready. He had to be. With each passing day, the shadow grew stronger, and the world seemed to tremble under its weight. He had come too far to turn back now. The time for doubt was over. Suddenly, the ground shook beneath them. The earth cracked open, and from within the chasm, a figure emerged. It was tall, its form cloaked in darkness, with eyes like burning embers. The creature was no longer just a shadow, but the very embodiment of it. It had come to claim the world, and Jack was its target. "You have come far, guardian," the creature hissed, its voice like 1,000 whispers. "But you are too late. The world belongs to me now." Jack stepped forward, his sword glowing with the magic he had gained. "Not if I can stop you," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. With a roar, the creature lunged at Jack, its claws like daggers, its body a swirling mass of darkness. Jack blocked the first strike, his sword vibrating with the force of the blow. He was pushed back, but he didn't falter. He had faced darkness before, and he would face it again. Aelor's voice echoed in his mind, urging him to stay focused. "Remember the balance, Jack. You must control the darkness, not fight it blindly." Jack closed his eyes for a moment, letting the power flow through him. He could feel the balance within, the magic that had been passed down through generations. He wasn't just fighting the shadow, he was becoming one with it. The battle raged on, the creature's strikes relentless. But Jack's movements had become fluid, his sword dancing through the air as he parried and countered. Each strike he made was guided by the magic he had learned. He wasn't just using strength, he was using his will to bend the darkness to his command. But the creature was cunning. It shifted form, splitting into smaller shadows that darted around Jack, attacking from every direction. Jack was surrounded, the darkness closing in on him from all sides. For a moment, he felt a surge of panic. Could he really stop it? But then he remembered the words of the Keeper, "Only through understanding can you defeat it." In the midst of the chaos, Jack paused. He took a deep breath, letting the stillness wash over him. The darkness wasn't just a force to be destroyed. It was a part of the world, a force of nature that existed in balance with the light. He had to find that balance within himself. With renewed clarity, Jack raised his sword. This time he didn't strike at the shadows. Instead, he called upon the magic, weaving it into the air around him. The shadows began to writhe, reacting to the magic, but they didn't attack. They swirled around Jack, as if waiting for him to command them. The creature roared, its form flickering as if it were struggling against the magic Jack had summoned. Jack focused all his energy, channeling the balance within him. The shadows that had once been his enemy were now under his control. With a final cry, he directed them back into the chasm from which they had come. The creature writhed, its form disintegrating as Jack's magic took hold. The storm in the sky began to calm, the winds dying down, and the earth stopped shaking. The darkness had not been destroyed, but it had been contained. As the last of the shadows faded, Jack fell to his knees, exhausted. The battle had taken everything from him. The power he had wielded was immense, but it had drained him. He looked to Aelor, who stood at the edge of the temple, watching silently. You did it, Alor said softly. The darkness is sealed for now. But the balance must be maintained. It is not gone forever, Jack nodded. He knew that. The fight wasn't over, it had only just begun. There would always be darkness, lurking in the corners of the world. But he had the power now to fight it, to keep it at bay. The storm had passed. The skies were clear once more, and the world seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. But Jack knew that peace was temporary. There would always be new challenges, new shadows to face. He couldn't afford to relax, not now, not ever. He stood, his body still weary but his spirit strong. The road ahead would be long, but he was no longer alone. With the magic he had learned and the allies he had gained, Jack was ready for whatever the future held. The shadow beneath the willow tree had been banished for now. The world around Jack seemed still, as if holding its breath. He stood alone beneath the willow tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. The battle was over, but the weight of what had happened still hung heavy in the air. He could feel the balance within him shifting, the magic settling into place. Alor appeared beside him, his face thoughtful. The darkness may be contained, but it is never truly gone, he said quietly. You must remain vigilant, Jack. The forces of the world are always in flux, Jack nodded, understanding the gravity of the words. The peace they had earned was fragile, but it was peace nonetheless. And for now, that was enough. As Jack turned to leave, something caught his eye. There, beneath the willow tree, was an old scroll, seemingly untouched by the battle. He knelt down to pick it up, unfurling it carefully. It was from the Keeper, the one who had first guided him on this journey. The message was simple yet profound. The shadow is but a reflection of the light. The balance must always be upheld. Your journey is far from over, Guardian. Trust in the path ahead. Jack stared at the words, the weight of their meaning sinking in. He wasn't finished. His role as the Guardian wasn't over. There would be more to face, more to learn, but he was ready. With the scroll in hand, Jack began to walk away from the willow tree, Alor beside him. The wind had died down, but the world still felt charged, as if the very earth itself was awaiting the next chapter of their story. The Keeper's words are clear, Alor said, glancing at the scroll. The journey never ends. You have grown stronger, but there will always be more shadows to face, Jack nodded, a sense of determination settling in his chest. He had faced the darkness and survived. He had learned the true meaning of balance, and he knew now that his purpose was far from finished. As they walked, Jack's mind wandered to the future. What challenges lay ahead? He had already seen so much: the dark creature, the trials, the struggle for balance. But there were whispers of something larger, something more dangerous lurking in the distance. The call of the unknown reached out to him, tugging at his soul. He knew that he couldn't ignore it. Whatever awaited him, he would face it head on, just as he had faced the shadows beneath the willow tree. I'm ready, Jack said aloud, his voice steady and full of resolve. Whatever comes next, I will face it. As the days passed, Jack and Alor traveled across the land, seeking the next piece of the puzzle. The world was still healing from the battle, but the darkness was never far from their minds. Strange things began to happen: sightings of creatures from the shadow realm, whispers on the wind, and a growing sense of unrest among the people. The storm was building again. Jack could feel it in his bones. The darkness was gathering, preparing for something far more destructive than anything they had faced before. But this time Jack would be ready. He had learned from his past battles, and he knew that he couldn't face this alone. As they reached the edge of a dark forest, Jack felt a familiar presence. It was the shadow, not the one they had defeated, but something else, something deeper, darker, and more ancient. It was a test. The final test. Aelor turned to Jack, his expression solemn. This is it. The true test of your power, your will, and your heart. If you fail, the balance will be broken forever. Jack drew his sword, feeling the weight of the responsibility pressing on him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the world, about all the lives that depended on him. I won't fail, Jack said, his voice firm. I've come too far to let it all fall apart now with that. They entered the forest, ready to face whatever awaited them. The final test had begun, and Jack was prepared to confront the darkness once more, knowing that this time it was not just about defeating it, it was about understanding it. The forest was dense, the trees so thick that the light struggled to break through. Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine as he and Aelor moved deeper into the shadows. The air was heavy, thick with an unsettling silence. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Jack's grip tightened on his sword as he scanned the darkness around him. Stay close, Aelor whispered. We don't know what's in here. The forest is alive with ancient magic. The deeper they walked, the more the trees seemed to close in on them. Every step felt like a step closer to something greater, something dangerous. Jack could feel the weight of the forest, pressing against him, as if it were testing his resolve. Suddenly, a whisper echoed through the trees, low and haunting. Jack stopped, his senses on high alert. The voice was familiar, yet distant, as if coming from the very air itself. Jack, the voice whispered, and he could feel it vibrating through his bones. You cannot escape your fate, Aelor stiffened beside him. The forest speaks in riddles, he warned, but these whispers, they are not good. Stay strong, Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. The voice was unsettling, but he had learned not to fear the unknown. This was just another test, another shadow to face. As they continued, the whispers grew louder, swirling around them. The forest seemed to shift, its dark branches twisting into unnatural shapes. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet gave way, and they were plunged into darkness. When Jack opened his eyes, he found himself standing in a familiar place, his childhood home. The walls were old, the furniture covered in dust. The air was thick with the scent of memories. But something was wrong. The shadows in the corners of the room moved, swirling and whispering, just out of sight. You cannot hide from your past, the voice echoed again, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. Was this an illusion? Was this a trick of the shadow? He clenched his fists, refusing to be caught in its grip. I know what this is, he muttered to himself. This is just an illusion, Jack focused, closing his eyes and pushing the illusion from his mind. The world around him began to fade, the walls of his home disappearing, replaced by the dark, twisted trees of the forest. Aelor stood beside him, his expression grim. It was a test, he said quietly. The shadow preys on your doubts, your fears. You must not let it take hold of you, Jack nodded, taking a deep breath. He had faced his past, and he had broken free. The forest may have tried to trick him, but he wasn't going to fall for it. As the illusion faded, Jack could feel the presence of the shadow growing stronger, pulling him forward. The trees seemed to move, guiding him deeper into the heart of the forest. The shadows twisted, reaching for him, as if trying to pull him into their grasp. "This is it," Aelor said, his voice a whisper of urgency. "The heart of the shadow. It's trying to take you, Jack. You must decide now, will you face it, or will you run?" Jack stood still for a moment, his mind racing. He had come so far, faced so much. This was the moment where it would all be decided. The choice was his. "I will face it," Jack said, his voice filled with determination. "I've come too far to turn back now." The forest opened up to reveal a dark clearing, and in the center stood a massive, swirling mass of shadows. It moved like liquid, shifting and changing form, its tendrils reaching out into the world. At its core was a figure, a dark, shadowy silhouette that seemed to pulse with malice. "You think you can defeat me?" Guardian the shadow hissed, its voice like 1,000 whispers. "I am the darkness that has always been. You cannot destroy me. You cannot escape me." Jack stepped forward, his sword glowing with the magic he had learned. "I am not here to destroy you," he said, his voice steady. "I am here to understand you." The shadow recoiled, its form flickering. "You cannot understand what you fear," it sneered. "You can only fight it with a roar." The shadow lunged at Jack, its tendrils like whips. Jack raised his sword, focusing all his energy into the strike. He knew that this wasn't just a battle of strength, it was a battle of will. The shadow was feeding on fear, on doubt. If he could stand firm, if he could hold onto his clarity, he could defeat it. The sword connected with the shadow, sending ripples through its form. The shadow recoiled, but it didn't vanish. Instead, it started to change, its tendrils turning inward, as if it were unraveling. Jack took a deep breath. "I understand now," he whispered. "You are a part of this world, a part of me. You can't be destroyed. You have to be accepted." As Jack spoke, the shadow seemed to calm, its form shifting and stabilizing. It no longer lashed out at him. Instead, it began to merge with the world around it, becoming part of the very fabric of the forest. Jack could feel the darkness within him, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It was a force of nature, a balance of light and dark. The shadow had not been destroyed, but it had been understood. Jack had learned to embrace it, to accept that it was part of the world and part of himself. "You have done it," Guardian Aelor said, his voice filled with awe. "You have understood the shadow, and in doing so, you have brought balance back to the world." Jack looked around, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. The forest was quiet now, the storm having passed. The balance had been restored, but Jack knew this was only the beginning. The shadow would always be there, in the corners of the world, and it was his duty to maintain the balance. The clearing was still. The darkness that had once seemed suffocating now felt peaceful. The shadow had not been vanquished, but it had been integrated into the world. Jack stood silently, his hand still gripping his sword, feeling the weight of his decision. It had been a battle not just against the shadow, but against himself. "We've done it," Jack murmured, his voice filled with wonder. He looked at Aelor, who nodded in agreement. "But the forest. It's different now, isn't it?" Aelor nodded slowly. "Yes, the balance has been restored. But remember, the shadow is always a part of the world. It must be watched, kept in harmony with the light." Jack looked around at the forest, which now seemed more alive than ever. The trees stood tall, their leaves rustling softly in the wind. The once oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a peaceful serenity. Yet, Jack knew that this peace would not last forever. The shadow, though calmed, would one day stir again. As they prepared to leave the clearing, a strange sound reached their ears. It was a low hum, almost like a distant melody carried on the wind. Jack turned toward the source of the sound, his instincts telling him that it was important. "Do you hear that?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Aelor's expression darkened. "I hear it. It's a call, but from where I cannot tell. Be cautious, Jack. The forest does not give up its secrets easily." Despite the warning, Jack felt compelled to follow the sound. It seemed to resonate with something deep within him, as if it was calling him home. He didn't understand it, but he knew he had to investigate. Following the humming melody, Jack and Aelor ventured further into the forest. The trees grew denser, the air thicker with mystery. The path ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, as if the forest itself was shifting to guide them. As they walked, the light dimmed, and the once familiar sounds of the forest birds chirping, leaves rustling faded into silence. Only the hum remained, louder now, filling the air with its strange energy. Jack's heart raced, his senses heightened. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he knew that whatever it was tied to the shadow he had just faced. "We're getting close," Jack said, more to himself than to Aelor. He felt a pull, a connection to the sound. The deeper they went, the stronger it became. The path finally led them to a large stone structure hidden within the trees. It was ancient, covered in vines and moss, but unmistakably a doorway to something deeper within the forest. The hum seemed to be coming from inside the structure. Jack approached cautiously, his hand reaching for the door. As his fingers brushed the stone, a rush of energy surged through him, and the door slowly creaked open. A cool breeze swept from within, carrying the faintest traces of the humming sound. Jack stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "I don't know, but it feels important." Beyond the stone door, the forest opened into a vast chamber, its walls made of living roots and twisting branches. The air was thick with magic, and at the center of the chamber stood a glowing crystal. It pulsed with an otherworldly light, casting long shadows across the room. Jack couldn't take his eyes off the crystal. It was the source of the hum, the source of the energy that had led them here. He stepped forward, his feet crunching on the forest floor as he moved closer to the heart of the chamber. Aelor's voice broke through the silence. "Be careful, Jack. This crystal, it holds great power. It's not just a source of light, it's the heart of the forest itself." Jack nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The crystal was ancient, tied to the forest's very essence. But what was its purpose? And why had it called to him? As Jack reached out to touch the crystal, the ground beneath them trembled. The chamber seemed to come alive, the roots of the trees twisting and stretching. The crystal flared brightly, and Jack's vision was flooded with visions of the forest in all its forms, ancient and new, its power ebbing and flowing with the seasons. The shadow he had faced earlier flickered in his mind's eye, now not a creature of evil but a force of balance, a necessary part of the forest's existence. It was clear now that the shadow was not a threat to the forest, but a protector of its secrets. Jack withdrew his hand, realizing the truth. The crystal was not just a source of power, it was the keeper of the forest's balance. It had called him here, because he was the guardian who could understand the forest's true nature. As Jack stood there, the hum grew louder, now merging with a deep, resonant voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth. Guardian. The voice boomed. You have come to the heart of the forest, where all life begins and ends. You have faced the shadow and embraced its balance. But now, you must choose your path. Jack's heart raced as the voice continued. You have the power to protect the forest or to let it fall into darkness. The choice is yours. Aelor stepped forward, his eyes wide with realization. And the forest has chosen you, Jack. It is your destiny to protect this world, to keep the balance between light and dark. But the power you hold is not yours alone, it belongs to the forest. Jack stood in silence, contemplating the weight of the decision before him. He had faced countless challenges, fought through darkness, and now he stood at a crossroads. The power of the forest, the responsibility of the balance, was in his hands. I choose to protect it, Jack said finally, his voice filled with resolve. I will guard the balance. No matter the cost, the crystal pulsed in response, its light shining brighter than ever before. The roots of the trees seemed to bow in acknowledgement, the chamber vibrating with the energy of the forest. Jack felt a surge of power within him, as though the forest itself was becoming a part of him. You have chosen wisely, the voice said, its tone approving. The balance is safe for now. With that, the hum faded, and the chamber returned to its quiet serenity. The choice had been made, and the path forward was clear. Jack knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but he was ready. The forest had found its guardian, and Jack was determined to live up to the trust it had placed in him. As the last echoes of the voice faded away, Jack stood still, absorbing the weight of the crystal's power. The forest around him seemed to breathe, alive and aware. The light from the crystal seemed to ripple through the roots, sending waves of energy through the ground. Jack felt a connection, not just to the forest, but to everything in it. The trees, the animals, even the air itself felt like part of him. We must leave this place, Aelor said softly, breaking the silence. The forest is safe for now, but we cannot stay here forever. Jack nodded, though his heart felt heavy. The forest had chosen him, and he knew his journey was far from over. He had a responsibility now, not just to the forest, but to the balance it held. He turned one last time to the glowing crystal, feeling its pull, before he followed Aelor out of the chamber. The path back to the village was quieter than before, the forest seemingly at peace. The creatures that had once hidden in the shadows now emerged, their eyes gleaming with curiosity but no fear. Jack's presence seemed to have changed something in the air, as if the very essence of the forest had shifted. It was as if the land had exhaled after holding its breath for centuries. As they neared the village, Jack felt a mix of emotions. He had left as a wanderer, uncertain of his place in the world, but now he returned to something more. A guardian. But even with this newfound purpose, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something he had yet to understand about his role. Aelor glanced at Jack. Do not worry, guardian. The answers will come in time. The forest has its ways. As they entered the village, the first thing Jack noticed was the change in the people's eyes. They had heard the story of his victory over the shadow, and now there was a reverence in their gaze. Whispers followed him as he walked through the streets, but none approached him directly. It was as if they were waiting for him to speak, to explain what had happened. Jack had no words to offer them. He was still processing everything he had learned, still trying to understand his place in the larger picture. The shadow, the crystal, the balance, it was all too much to comprehend at once. That night, Jack sat by the fire in his home, his thoughts a tangled mess. He had restored peace to the forest, but peace was fragile. The whispering winds that had once been a comfort now seemed to carry a warning, a reminder that balance could be easily disrupted. Days passed, and life in the village returned to a semblance of normalcy, but Jack remained uneasy. The forest was peaceful, but there were moments when he could feel the shadows stirring beneath the surface, waiting for something. It was as if the forest was holding its breath again, preparing for a new challenge. One evening, as Jack walked alone near the edge of the woods, he felt a presence, dark and unfamiliar, creeping along the edges of the forest. It was not the same shadow he had confronted before. This was something different, something older. His heart pounded in his chest as the wind whispered in his ear, carrying a message of warning. Jack's hand instinctively went to the sword at his side, but he knew that this time a blade might not be enough. The balance was delicate, and the forces at play were beyond his understanding. He had been chosen to protect the forest, but what if the true test was still to come? In the days that followed, Jack sought out Aelor. He needed answers, needed to understand what this new threat could be. The Elder Guardian was seated by the hearth, a book of ancient knowledge open before him. His eyes flickered up as Jack entered, the weight of his questions clear in his expression. Aelor, Jack began, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. There's something in the woods. It feels different, like a shadow of a different kind. Aelor's eyes narrowed. I feared this day would come. There are forces in the forest older than even the shadow you defeated. They are tied to the very roots of this land, and their awakening is a sign of a much larger shift. Aelor closed the book, his expression grave. There is an ancient ritual, long forgotten, that can restore the balance. But it requires more than strength, it requires wisdom, patience, and understanding of the forest's deepest secrets. You must find the lost circle of the elder trees. The elder trees were said to be the first trees of the forest, ancient beings that had witnessed the rise and fall of many ages. Their roots were intertwined with the very foundation of the land, and their knowledge was said to be as old as the world itself. However, they had been lost to time, their location a mystery known only to those who had the wisdom to seek them. Jack knew what he had to do. With Aelor's guidance, he set off once more into the heart of the forest, determined to find the elder trees and learn the secrets that would allow him to protect the balance. He walked through the dense woods, the air thick with magic and mystery. The further they traveled, the more the forest seemed to close in on them, as if it was testing their resolve. As they reached the deepest part of the woods, Jack felt a sense of awe. He could feel the presence of something ancient, something powerful. The trees around him seemed to hum with energy, and he knew that the elder trees were close. The moment Jack laid eyes on the first of the elder trees, he knew he had found something extraordinary. It was larger than any tree he had ever seen, its bark rough and gnarled, its branches stretching high into the sky. The air around it was thick with power, and Jack could feel the weight of its age, its wisdom. As they approached, a deep, resonant voice filled the air. Who seeks the knowledge of the elder trees? The voice was ancient, yet clear, and it seemed to come from the very tree itself. I am Jack, guardian of the forest, Jack replied, his voice steady. I seek the knowledge that will restore the balance and protect the forest from the growing darkness. The tree's branches shifted, as though considering his words. The balance is delicate, it said, its voice softening. But you are not alone, guardian. The shadows you face are part of a greater truth. You must understand the nature of the darkness to restore the light. The elder tree's words echoed in Jack's mind, and he realized that his journey had only just begun. The true test was not just to fight the shadows, but to understand them. The light and the shadow were two halves of the same whole, and only by embracing both could he truly protect the balance of the forest. You must go deeper, the tree intoned, its voice now a whisper. Seek the heart of the shadow and learn its truth. Only then can you find the path to restore harmony. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he nodded. This was the next step in his journey, and he knew that whatever awaited him, it would shape the future of the forest and his destiny. Jack stood at the edge of the ancient clearing, his heart racing with anticipation. The elder tree had told him to seek the heart of the shadow, but he had no idea what that truly meant. The forest around him seemed to be alive with whispers, the branches shifting and creaking as though in warning. The air grew colder, and a sense of unease washed over him. As Jack ventured deeper, he felt the presence of something ancient and malevolent lurking just beyond his sight. The shadows twisted and writhed, moving as if they had a life of their own. It was a strange sensation, like the darkness itself was watching him, waiting for him to make the next move. His hand instinctively gripped the sword at his side, but he knew this journey would not be won with steel. He would need to rely on his wits and his understanding of the forest's true power. The deeper Jack went into the heart of the shadow, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees grew taller and more twisted, their branches curling like claws in the dim light. The once familiar path had disappeared, and Jack found himself walking through a labyrinth of roots and rocks, unsure of which direction to take. Suddenly, a soft glow appeared ahead of him. It was faint at first, but as he drew closer, the light grew brighter, casting an ethereal glow over the darkened forest. In the center of the light was a pool of water, its surface still and calm. Jack felt a strange pull, as if the pool itself was calling him. He knelt beside it, peering into the water, and saw a reflection not of his own face but of something far darker. The reflection was distorted, twisted by shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe within the water. Jack's breath caught in his throat as the reflection reached out, almost as if it was alive. As Jack stared into the pool, the voice he had been hearing all this time spoke once more. It was soft, a whisper carried on the wind, but it held a strange power that seemed to sink into his bones. "You have come far," Guardian, the voice murmured. "But do you truly understand what you face? The shadows are not just enemies, they are a part of you. They are the darkness within every living thing, a force that must be understood, not feared." Jack took a step back from the pool, his mind racing. What did the voice mean? He had always seen the shadows as enemies, something to fight against. But now, he began to realize that the true nature of the darkness was far more complicated. The pool's reflection began to shift, showing Jack not as the guardian, but as a young boy lost, scared, and uncertain. It was a version of himself he had long forgotten, a part of him that had been buried deep within. The shadows twisted around this image, feeding on his doubts and fears, growing stronger with each passing moment. Jack's heart pounded as he faced the reflection. The voice spoke again, its tone filled with sorrow. "This is the true face of the shadow. It is the fear, the doubt, the darkness that resides within every soul. You must face it if you wish to restore the balance." Jack felt the weight of the words settle over him like a heavy cloak. The true test was not to fight the shadows, but to accept them, to confront the darkness within himself. It was a realization that sent a chill through his spine, but he knew what he had to do. Jack closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He had faced countless battles in the physical world, but this was different. This was a battle of the soul, one that would require all his strength and understanding. He could no longer run from the darkness inside him. It was time to face it. The shadows in the reflection began to grow, swirling around the image of the young boy. Jack reached out, feeling a surge of energy within him. He could feel the weight of his doubts, his fears, all of it rising to the surface. The darkness whispered to him, trying to pull him in, to make him believe that he was weak, that he was nothing. But Jack didn't falter. He had come this far, and he would not be undone by his own fear. With a cry, he stepped forward, embracing the shadows rather than fighting them. As he did, the darkness began to dissipate, melting away like smoke in the wind. When Jack opened his eyes again, the reflection in the pool had changed. The boy was no longer lost or afraid. He stood tall, his face filled with a quiet strength. The shadows that had once surrounded him now faded into the background, no longer a threat, but a part of him that he had learned to understand. The voice spoke once more, this time filled with approval. "You have passed the test, Guardian. The balance is within you, for you have learned that light and shadow cannot exist without one another. Only by understanding both can you protect the harmony of the forest." Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. He had faced the darkness within himself and had come out stronger on the other side. The forest had chosen him for a reason, and now he understood why. With the balance restored, Jack stood in the clearing, the soft glow of the elder tree's light casting a peaceful aura over the land. The shadows that once plagued the forest were now nothing more than whispers in the wind. Jack had learned to accept both light and dark within him, and with that knowledge, the world around him seemed calmer, more harmonious. The air no longer felt heavy, and the eerie whispers that had once filled the forest had quieted. The creatures of the woods, once hidden in fear, now moved freely, their steps light and unburdened. Jack could feel the forest's gratitude, as if it too had been freed from a long-held burden. But despite the calm, Jack knew that this peace was fragile. The shadows had not been vanquished, they had merely been understood. And with that understanding, Jack had become the guardian not only of the forest but of the balance between light and dark. As Jack turned to leave the clearing, the elder tree spoke, its voice as soft as the rustling of leaves. "You have done well, Guardian. The balance has been restored, and the forest is at peace for now." Jack bowed his head in respect, but the tree continued, "But peace is never permanent. You must carry this wisdom with you, for the shadows will always return in some form. You will need to remain vigilant to protect the harmony of this land." The tree's branches swayed as if in agreement. From deep within its bark, a small, glowing seed appeared, floating gently toward Jack. This is the seed of understanding, planted in the heart of the forest, and it will grow, spreading light wherever darkness tries to take root. Jack took the seed with reverence, knowing that this gift would help him maintain the balance in the future. With a final glance at the elder tree, he turned and began his journey back. The forest now a peaceful sanctuary. The journey back through the forest was peaceful. Jack could hear the soft chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was a stark contrast to the fear and tension he had felt earlier. The world felt new. as if the very air had been cleansed by his journey. As he walked, Jack thought about the lessons he had learned. He had come to understand that darkness was not something to be feared or fought. It was part of the world, a force that existed in balance with the light. Only by accepting it could true peace be found. The seed in his hand pulsed with a gentle warmth, a reminder of the responsibility he now carried. Jack knew that his role as a guardian would never be over. The shadows would always try to return, but he was ready to protect the balance, whatever the cost. By the time Jack reached the heart of the forest, the first rays of dawn were beginning to light the sky. The world seemed to come alive in the soft glow of morning, and Jack felt a sense of fulfillment settle within him. He had faced the darkness, both external and within himself, and had emerged victorious. He knelt in the center of the clearing, where the forest's energy felt strongest, and planted the glowing seed. As he did, a brilliant light erupted from the ground, spreading in all directions. The roots of the elder tree seemed to reach out, connecting with the light, as if the entire forest were coming alive in a symbiotic embrace. The light grew brighter, more intense, until it enveloped the entire clearing. Jack stood back, awestruck, as the energy spread through the forest, filling it with a new vitality. He knew that this was just the beginning. The forest was no longer just a place, it was a living, breathing entity that would grow stronger with each passing day. As the light continued to spread, Jack could see the changes taking place all around him. The trees seemed to stand taller, their leaves glistening with a renewed brilliance. The creatures of the forest moved with newfound purpose, their lives no longer shrouded in fear. The darkness, though still present, no longer held sway over the forest. It was part of the natural cycle now, existing in harmony with the light. The whispers of the shadows were no longer ominous, they were a reminder of the balance that had been restored. Jack stood tall, his heart full of gratitude for the lessons the forest had taught him. He had come seeking answers, but in the end, it was the journey itself that had transformed him. He had learned that true peace came not from vanquishing the darkness, but from understanding it. With the first rays of sunlight now fully illuminating the forest, Jack felt a deep sense of calm wash over him. The forest was at peace, but he knew that peace was always fleeting. As the new guardian, he had learned that balance was not something to be maintained by force, but by understanding and acceptance. Jack looked out over the forest, the trees standing tall and proud, their leaves dancing in the breeze. The shadows that had once threatened to consume it were now a part of the landscape, blending seamlessly with the light. As long as he was there, Jack knew the balance would be protected. His duty was not to fight the darkness, but to ensure that both light and shadow could coexist in harmony. As Jack stood in the clearing, watching the light spread through the forest, he couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of responsibility. The peace had been restored, but he knew that it was fragile, like a delicate flower that could easily be crushed by the weight of the world. The shadows would not give up so easily, and neither could he. The elder tree's words echoed in his mind, "You must remain vigilant." Jack understood now that his role as a guardian was not just about protecting the forest from immediate threats, but about ensuring its long-term survival. The shadows, though hidden for now, would always return in different forms, seeking to disrupt the balance. But Jack was ready. He had become part of the forest, and its well-being was now intertwined with his own. As the day began to fade, Jack found himself standing by the edge of the forest, where the towering willow tree once stood. The tree was still there, but now its branches were swaying gently in the evening breeze, as if to remind him that the journey was not over. The sky above had turned a soft shade of purple, and the first stars of the evening began to twinkle. But Jack noticed something strange. The shadows, which had once been an enemy, now seemed to move on their own, stretching longer than they should have. They whispered in a language Jack could almost understand, a warning of what was to come. The balance he had fought so hard to restore was being tested again. Jack's heart raced, knowing that the shadows were not gone, they had merely retreated. They were waiting for the right moment to strike. And now it seemed that moment had arrived. That night, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves were eerily absent. A stillness had fallen over the land, broken only by the occasional creak of branches swaying in the wind. Jack stood watch, his senses heightened. The shadows seemed to pulse around him, as though they were gathering strength. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The willow tree, once a symbol of peace, now appeared to be a dark sentinel, its branches reaching toward the heavens in warning. Jack knew that something was coming. He had always felt the presence of the shadows, but now they were no longer whispers. They were alive, moving through the forest like a silent predator, waiting to strike when least expected. And Jack, as the guardian, would need to face them once again. As the night deepened, the air grew colder. Jack could feel the shadows drawing closer, their presence like a cold wind brushing against his skin. But this time he was ready. He had learned the importance of balance, of understanding both light and dark, and he knew that he could not defeat the shadows with force alone. Instead, Jack took a deep breath, grounding himself in the teachings of the elder tree. He closed his eyes and focused on the pulse of the forest, feeling the energy that flowed through every leaf, every root, every creature. The shadows may have returned, but Jack knew that he was not alone. The forest and the light it held would always be there to guide him. With newfound determination, Jack stood tall, ready to face whatever the darkness would bring. He was no longer just a guardian of the forest, he was a protector of the balance itself. And he would not allow the shadows to undo everything he had fought for. The shadows gathered like a storm on the horizon. Jack stood still, his heart pounding in his chest, feeling the weight of the forest's silence pressing against him. The wind began to howl, and the leaves of the trees rustled as if they were warning him of the danger that was coming. He could feel the darkness creeping closer, each step it took making the air feel heavier, thicker. The forest around him seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Jack's senses were heightened, his instincts sharp. He knew that the moment the darkness fully enveloped him, he would need all the strength he had gained on his journey to stand firm. Suddenly, the shadows moved. They slithered like smoke, rising from the forest floor and twisting around the trees. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he saw the shapes emerging from the darkness. They were not creatures of flesh and blood, but manifestations of fear. Each shadow a different form, some tall and others crouching low to the ground, all moving with an eerie, unnatural grace. As the first shadow lunged toward him, Jack stepped forward, raising his hand. A surge of energy pulsed through him, the light from the elder tree growing brighter in his chest. The shadow hesitated, swirling around him like a cloud of smoke, testing his resolve. Jack knew this was only the beginning. The darkness had returned, but he was ready to face it head-on. The shadows circled around Jack, growing more aggressive. They seemed to be drawn to the light within him, sensing the power he had gained from the elder tree. Jack's hand trembled as he felt the pull of the darkness. It was as if the shadows were trying to consume him, to snuff out the light he carried. But Jack stood firm, recalling the words of the elder tree, balance is the key. He closed his eyes and focused, letting the light within him expand outward. The shadows writhed and hissed, but they could not touch the warmth that Jack had become. His connection to the forest, to the very heart of the land, was stronger than ever before. As the darkness tried to press in on him, Jack released a pulse of light, pushing the shadows back. They retreated, but only for a moment. Jack knew they would return again, and each time they would grow stronger. He had to be ready. As the shadows receded for the moment, Jack took a step back, his mind racing. He felt the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. He could not afford to be distracted. The darkness was patient, and it would wait for the right time to strike again. Jack needed to find a way to weaken it for good. But how? Just as he was about to gather his thoughts, a whisper echoed through the trees. It was soft, like the rustling of leaves, but it was unmistakable. Jack looked up and saw the branches of the willow tree swaying gently in the breeze. The tree had always been a symbol of wisdom, and now, in this moment of uncertainty, Jack knew that he needed its guidance. With a deep breath, Jack stepped closer to the willow tree. He closed his eyes, letting the whispers of the tree wash over him, and soon the answers he sought began to form in his mind. The shadows were not just an external threat, they were a manifestation of imbalance, of fear, and they could only be fully defeated by embracing both the light and the darkness within himself. As the night wore on, Jack stood at the base of the willow tree, his mind clearer than ever. The darkness was not an enemy to be fought. It was a part of the world. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful journey. We hope this story has helped you unwind and brought a sense of calm to your night. Remember, sweet dreams are just a story away. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another relaxing story. We'll be here, ready to guide you into a world of rest and relaxation whenever you need it. Until next time, sleep well and let your dreams take you to beautiful places. Good night and sweet dreams.